You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Welcome back to part 3 of Prison Talk with Jamie Meade and
Emma Charleston.
this it is a continuation of the episode on my testimony and how I have arrived on the path that I'm on now within the Department of Corrections. And I did want to touch on some things before we get into any type of discussion on that. For me to be accepted into CTS, the Chicago Theological Seminary, it took a lot. Their Masters of Divinity committee had to approve me. The school had to develop a pilot project. They had to stay within the parameters of their accreditation. And I didn't realize it was actually Chaplain White, who was a chaplain here at the Macomb Correctional Facility, that really spoke to me about the Chicago Theological Seminary. I didn't really know the importance or how prestigious the school was.
Yeah.
And, I was just following, what people were putting in front of me.
Yeah.
And he's Chaplain White has retired, and he was a part of the African Methodist Episcopal, the AME Church. And he did have a master's in divinity, and he brought it to my attention how prestigious that school was and how big on civil rights and how progressive it was. And so our listeners will know I am the first incarcerated person to ever be accepted into the Chicago Theological Seminary. And I didn't even know how much classes cost. And they're close to, $3,000 with books and everything for each class. And the Master's in Divinity is a grueling degree. And I say that is because it covers from philosophy to history to just culture to social work to counseling to, it covers many areas that you have to take classes in, and it's like one of 3 what is considered professional degrees that require 75 credits for a master's degree. Most master degree programs only require 36 credits approximately. A Juris Doctor to be a lawyer requires 75. A master's in social work requires 75, and the master's in divinity requires 75. But I understand now it does put you in a position of knowing and being responsible enough to work under the authority of a church and have that authority to make decisions. And also I wanted to say that for the United Church of Christ to take such a progressive step and registering me or agreeing to put me in as a member in discernment is the first in the history of the church. Not just in Michigan. Pastor Deb and Pastor Burke and Pastor Grazer and Pastor Young, they've looked and they're unaware of any other incarcerated person, especially someone serving life, to be into this position, to be given this position in the church. And I had to go through many committee hearings, not just with CTS, but with the church to be given this status within the church. So I just want the listeners, it is a process that has slowly become, and I am a member of the People's Church, which is formerly Woodside Church of Flint. I became a member in 2019. I believe it was 2019. It's like an off-site member because I'm incarcerated, but church members there are, wonderful. They're very accepting. I started writing for the newsletter. Then I started writing for the Covenant Association newsletter that Pastor Deb Conrad was editor for. And I do want all of our listeners to know that since then, Pastor Deb last year ended up leaving the People's Church of Flint.
Yeah.
She was up here, I think, 7-8 years, and she relocated to take on a job in a Colorado church. So they have moved there. Her and her partner had moved there to help, with that church.
Yeah.
So hopefully soon I will be able to talk to Pastor Deb again.
Yeah.
The church has a policy or procedure. It's really, I think it's an unwritten rule, but they're not supposed to communicate with any of the members of the last church for 2 years.
Okay.
That allows the new pastor to, and we do have, I believe I'm saying it correctly. He's an interim pastor, David Sekelkelka.
Yeah.
He's a interim pastor for the People's Church, and he has been in contact with me and has been participating with all the meetings with the department, because we have been going through some difficulties on me continuing the master's degree.
Yeah.
And that is within, those difficulties is all of doing with the Michigan Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
Attempting to back out of the deal. So, but I do believe avenues will be opened up for me to continue.
Yeah.
So I am grateful for all the church leaders and everyone that's been helping, to continue advocating for me to continue the program.
Yeah.
And they are advocating.
Yeah.
And for our listeners also, because of my involvement with the church, and they know my advocacy work, and the church has officially announced that they are supporting the second look sentencing legislation that's going to be introduced in Michigan. So that will give many people incarcerated an opportunity to be resentenced, even if you have life without parole, if that legislation gets passed. And that's the United Church of Christ has approximately 140 churches in Michigan with over 300 clergymen and women. So they do have a large voting block in the state of Michigan. So,
yeah, well,
and they are advocating.
Yeah, well, that's good. Because
so I guess so just everyone knows that my path is it just seems it is right. To me it feels right, and I do believe this is right for me.
Yeah.
Whether I go in as a pastor of a church after I finish my education, or whether I work underneath the church and develop a reentry program for the church. I do believe that is part of my path to continue my advocacy work through the church and introduce people to Jesus Christ and God in a way that doesn't push them away as if I was always throwing Bible verses at them.
Well, for people that aren't really interested or might be but don't really know if they are, there's quite often nothing worse than somebody that's throwing Bible verses at them and ranting and raving at them. So I think that's the best. But then again, that's like anything, but especially when it comes to religion, spirituality.
And that discouraged me. I think that discouraged me a lot throughout my incarceration.
Yeah.
And I always attended church, but I did it more on I think it was just more on something I thought I had to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't me developing a relationship with God.
Yeah.
It was me just attending.
Yeah.
And now, I'm working on my relationship with God. And it's every day. It's a step. It's a progress.
Yeah.
It's not something that just snapped. And that's, Dr. Terrell said something in one of her lectures that I thought was one of the realest things ever that I've heard from a pastor, because she is a pastor and she does preach.
Yeah.
She said, out of everyone that I've heard speak in tongues that get up there in front of a congregation, she said only one was real to her.
Yeah.
Because she understood what they were saying. And I often hear that. And I never heard someone say that, and now I understand, because a lot of times we do things and we we glorify it. We, you know, dramatize it. We
Yeah.
we do a lot of things to try to be seen and heard.
Yeah.
And I think God's path for me is a different one. It's it's to give back.
Yeah.
It's to give back to society for the wrongs that I've done and to make amends with the wrongs.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, I think if that's your path, then that's your path, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I can't disagree with any of that. I'm not you. But one thing I do want to ask you, because you're just talking about tongues, speaking in tongues. Now, I'm Australian. I don't know if there are many churches and or religions where you're talking in tongues. They're very few and far between. Secondly, the only people I've ever met that speak in tongues were, in fact, Americans, Texans, in fact, and they scared the bejeebus out of me. Are you telling me this whole Baptist thing you got going on, you're running around speaking in tongues?
Well, I mean, I've never understood anyone speaking in tongues. I've never spoken in tongues.
Mm. But no, I'm not having a go. I'm trying to understand, is that the Baptist church, is that with the speaking in tongues in the, like, I don't know, so you need to tell me.
You do have preachers that speak in tongues, and I just know, and I can't tell you the exact verse in the Bible, but it does talk about speaking in tongues. If someone who is teaching in the church is speaking in tongues in front of everyone, and someone walks up and hears that,
yeah.
I think how does the verses say that they may think everyone in there is drunken and something wrong with them, and it scares them away, and I think, you know, that does occur. Do I believe tongues is possible? Yes. Is it a gift that's often given? No. I don't believe that, because if someone is speaking in tongues and they are truly speaking in tongues and not just babbling, I believe I should be able to understand them. Yeah. Especially if they're speaking in front of a congregation.
Yes.
Or someone in there should be able to understand them and interpret it for me. And the Bible does state that the person that can interpret tongues has a better gift than that person that speaks in tongues. Yes. So maybe I don't have that gift of interpretation. Maybe it wasn't meant for me to be, you know, but I've never spoken in tongues. Yeah. And it's a gift that I believe that is rare. Yeah. And maybe one that's misinterpreted. We don't know. Yeah. And that's what I like about what I'm learning in seminary. There are many different approaches to interpretation. Yes. So. Yeah. So all I was trying to figure out was if Baptists are the ones that speak in tongues.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Because that's got my mind, like my mind is now just, that's what I'm thinking about, you know, ooh. Yeah. Because I have now been distracted from the point of this conversation.
Do you think we should continue another episode, or should we end it on this?
We can if you want. It's up to you, because even if we don't post them all at the same time, we can post them over, you know, a couple of weeks. Yes. I'm going to ask you some things that I want to ask you, which aren't the same, because it doesn't come from a Christian perspective. And it doesn't come from any particular perspective, but it's questions that I want to ask you.
Well, I guess we'll continue on a fourth part to this episode then, and we'll talk to you in 15 minutes.
Sounds like a plan.